Well, as you heard in the introductions, I come to you with two hats that I wear, two perspectives that I bring. Number one, that of being an administrator of a research center here at Tulane University. And then number two, that of being a community organizer. And I never thought in my wildest dreams I'd be considered someday a community organizer, but here I am before you as such. But let me really speak from that perspective of organizer, coming from the neighborhood, and in particular the Holy Cross Lower Ninth Ward neighborhood. For a number of us, just as I'm sure in many of the other neighborhoods across the city, across this region, who have very strongly and very tirelessly on a daily basis worked to bring back ourselves and bring back our communities, we have wanted to learn whatever lessons we could possibly learn from the episodes of Katrina and Rita, because we were flooded in both situations. We have wanted to learn whatever lessons there are to be learned, and we're very pleased and excited that the concept of sustainable design and green energy efficiency have hit us the way they have. As you all know, our neighborhood, or maybe you don't know, our neighborhood right now is one of only about maybe 2,200 at the very most, from a pre-Katrina population of a little over 14,400. So organizing down there these days is a lot more easy and a lot more manageable. But even as we drive around and we still see that there's a lot of ravaged properties and vacant lots, and you name it, vegetation growing wildly, you know the story. It causes us very much so to feel like, will we ever be able to bounce back, okay? Will we ever be able to accomplish this recovery? But we can't help but feel, given all the great buzz and all the good activities and resources that have come our way, that we really are onto something. In fact, you know from the numerous articles and talk show interviews and so forth, the numerous academic partners and other nonprofit partners, faculty and students from all across the globe that have besieged us, we can't help but feel that we really are onto something. Life for us, for a while, will just be a smaller one. It will be a smaller population. And it's probably all we can really manage and sustain for the time being, okay? But we try to communicate as much as possible to our residents within the neighborhood and those still afar, that those of us down here who consider ourselves to be sort of the pioneers on the frontier, we're doing our best to rebuild this place in a good and smart manner. And that this community, and not just Lower 9, but all of New Orleans, will be a much better and a much stronger, a much more energy efficient and sustainable one to come back home to someday. In fact, let me go back to that point about the silver linings of Katrina. First of all, how did our story begin? Well, it began with the development of a sustainable recovery plan. With the help of our research center here at Tulane, other academic partners, the U.S. Green Building Council. In fact, I should point out, from the U.S. Green Building Council, we met what we've come to know as three gurus in the realm of sustainable design. They go by the names of Bob Berkebile, Bill Browning, and Bill Becker. All those B's, we affectionately call them the B team. So the B team is our A team as far as we're concerned. And so these guys and numerous others helped us craft a document that we feel serves as our foundation or our Bible for our recovery. And as we completed that planning process in June of '06, for those of you who were around during that time, you then heard about how there was the rollout of this second planning process known as the Lambert planning process. Well, that foundation in our very own sustainable plan was a good foundation to then springboard into the Lambert planning process. A lot of the thoughts and ideas and elements expressed in that plan simply enhanced and influenced the subsequent planning process. And then there was the Unified New Orleans planning process. Now, by that time, by that third time, we were pretty much playing to death, we felt, and still feel to some degree. But there was another silver lining in that it got residents talking once again about sustainability, about an energy-efficient green recovery. And it coalesced us and brought us together in the form of a Lower Ninth Ward stakeholders group. That stakeholders group still meets. In fact, we meet every Wednesday at 5:30. I had to chair last night's meeting. It's a task, but we do it. We drudge through it. It's been through that group and with that group that other partners have come to us in Lower 9 who have come to bring various projects in the realm of sustainable, affordable housing, whole 9 yards, such as Brad Pitt and the Cherokee Investment Group, through which we've all come to be known as Make It Right. In fact, I'm a member of the Make It Right partnership down there. And Global Green also came to us before Make It Right came into existence, and numerous others. And so I never thought I would see the day when we as a community, we sit around our table every week and convene as stakeholders, and we talk about projects of all kinds, and we ask the question, how green is that? How sustainable is that? Oh, okay. What are the technologies and features offered? It's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful silver lining and set of silver linings that we're experiencing right now. And it continues to grow. I mean, folks, the number of partners that continue to approach us on a daily basis just increases. It becomes a chore, it has become a chore in managing it all. And we don't turn anyone away. If we can't immediately fit you in terms of a particular project or layout of what we're trying to do in the community, we just say, not right now, give us about a week, we'll figure it out, and we then engage the folks. And in fact, I should also point out, we now have a Center for Sustainable Design, and as we call it, civic engagement in Lower 9. With the help of Tulane and those numerous other academic partners and nonprofit partners, we've got a center to help make real on a daily basis for our residents what it means to be sustainably recover or be on that path towards sustainable recovery. And that means receiving, with the help of friends and partners from all around, donations of radiant barrier insulation, compact fluorescent light bulbs, environmentally friendly paints, you name it. We ask residents to sign up at the center, let us know what your housing needs are, and then as materials come, we call them up and let them know. Saturday is the rollout of some materials for you. Be here at such and such a time. It's that kind of effort, it's that kind of movement that's afoot here. And like I said, as we continue to drive through the neighborhood and see that there's still so much work that needs to be done, we still can't help but feel that we're on to something really big and good here. It's really necessary. And, you know, unfortunately, Katrina and Rita had to be the episodes we had to go through in order to realize this point here. And we're very upbeat, and we're very psyched and geeked about all that's happening across the country as pertains to the green movement. You know, hearing yesterday that our very own new governor, Bobby Jindal, has set in place an executive order that says Louisiana's governmental structures need to be more green and move towards that. We feel like we're really on to something. And it's discussions like this that further allow us to get the message out and allow us to connect with you all and numerous others to hit home this message that New Orleans is on the way back, but it's better, it's going to be smarter, it's going to be more sustainable. And so that's all I want to really offer at this time. It's from the community's perspective here. Thank you.
We have time for a few questions, so if you just want to raise your hands and... I guess we can pass one around.
Thank you. John Klingman, you mentioned that where you rebuild is a part of the sustainability formula as much as what you rebuild. And my question, I guess, is for Carrie and Charlton. How do you factor in that where question? If you build a sustainable structure in an unsustainable place, is it still sustainable development?
I get this question all the time, mostly from people who don't live anywhere near New Orleans and maybe who have never been here. And I think ultimately our goal, from a nationwide perspective, or maybe even a global perspective, needs to be to begin to choose places for cities that make sense. That said, I think that New Orleans has such a rich cultural capital that we can't even talk about erasing this city or moving it to a different place. And I think if you look at a lot of the really unsustainable cities in the U.S., we've got, Las Vegas is a really good example where there's just growth that is proceeding at an unbelievable rate, and the water table can't support it. Where they're building in a desert. I think that we need to sort of look first to the cities that are engaging in major new development. I'm not talking about the rebuilding effort here in New Orleans, which is essentially just sort of using a lot of the existing infrastructure and bringing houses back. But I think that first we need to curb new building on the fringes of cities and in cities that are unsustainable or in unsustainable locations. And then we need to address how our footprint is affecting global warming in cities like New Orleans. So we can actually look at it. I think for New Orleans, we need to start looking at it as a case-by-case scenario where you look at each residence and say, okay, what can we do to make this particular location more green? And maybe it involves putting your house up on stilts or improving the levee or any one of those things. Go ahead.
Okay. Rich, I never thought we'd arrive at such a conclusion as well, or realization, I should say, in the Lower Ninth Ward. But we're now exploring how perhaps some of the lowland in the Lower Ninth Ward could then be acquired by the stakeholders group in the form of a community land trust, where that land then is not redeveloped, okay? Perhaps it's held as some sort of retention area, or we explore some sort of innovative water park of some kind, or a rain garden area, community rain garden area. Because we realize not all of this should or probably will be redeveloped. How can we as a community hold it and use it for a greater community good or goal?
Yes. I think Rich's question is also extremely important, and it gets to two things for me. One is not all sustainability issues can or should be solved at the scale of architecture. You can almost put a building anywhere if you make enough emphases on environmental response, but that's not necessarily an appropriate or a positive solution. Sometimes it's at the neighborhood scale or at the scale of the city that the sustainable issues are best dealt. And then secondly, there's a wonderful principle in architecture called site repair, which has to do with taking a condition that's already been degraded environmentally and using that as a building site. And the advantage of this is that you're improving something rather than trying to think about pristine locations to inhabit with buildings or neighborhoods. To think about locations where already there's been some human intervention that has perhaps negatively influenced place and turn that around into a positive influence on place. And I think if we start thinking that way, that's also going to have a profoundly positive effect on our environmental scenarios.
Is this on? Okay. I was recently reading in Metropolis magazine some concerns about whether or not LEED was actually going to live through the next decade. What are your thoughts on that as far as the rating system in the sense of that it rates specific materials instead of how those materials are used as a whole?
There's a wonderful Ed Masria article that originally appeared in Metropolis as well. And Metropolis, of course, is a fabulous magazine if you're interested in issues of sustainability. And Masria said that his difficulty with LEED is that it enforces a kind of technical competence. And that he said, unfortunately, in design offices, there's going to be the lead person. And after the design is done, you'll kind of check it off with the lead person to make sure it gets enough points so that the rating system is adhered to. And his point was the opposite, which was, in fact, that all of us, whether we're design professionals or clients or community people, need to think in sustainable terms. And LEED then becomes an outgrowth or a kind of response to that, rather than as a primary device to prove that we are being sustainably oriented. And I think that that's the right attitude. And that's why I showed the Morphosis buildings, because this was a firm that for many years was accruing architectural design awards, and the word sustainable never crossed the firm's lips. And eventually, within the last, 5 years, the principals of the firm said, you know, this is too important for us to ignore it. And it's not simply somebody in the office, it's everybody in the office that's saying, we're dedicated to this. And I think the same thing applies on campus. I wanted to say to everybody here, whether you're in architecture or not, that sometimes, I think Charles has already pointed this out nicely, that it's the client, it's people for whom buildings are built that can push an agenda. And that's just as good or better than for an architect to come and say, I'm going to deliver a sustainable project to you. And I think that can also happen on campus. In fact, that's one of the reasons that the environmental features of this building are the way they are, which is that when the building was commissioned for renovation, student government got involved, students got involved individually and said, we want a green building. But before that, it was the Israel building, the other building on campus, which is kind of a beacon of sustainable design. The CBR, the people on the campus said, we want a building that has sustainability. Now, there are other projects on the campus. For example, there's about a $30 million athletic facility that's going to involve a redesign of the interior of the Fogelman Arena and a new practice facility for athletics. And I'm sure the word sustainable has not been even mentioned in that project. So we'll see if it's going to be at some point. But I think everybody can really push buildings and environmental design in this direction, whether from a professional viewpoint or from an interested party's viewpoint, and that's incredibly important.
I think that it's also good to point out that LEED is an evolving certification process. They're constantly reinventing sort of how they package it and what the requirements are. And I'm looking forward to seeing some of these certifications move more in the direction of building performance or being performance driven, so that you have you need to make sure that your building achieves a certain level of energy efficiency, say, but they don't tell you how to do it. You don't have to incorporate 2 points from this category and 2 points from that category and 1 over here. Doesn't matter. Just get there, however you can get there. And then what that allows you to do as a designer or the owner of such a building is really use the contextual approach, whatever works with that region, with that specific site, and with the type of building that you're trying to create. So it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to certification.
And I was just going to offer briefly, from the standpoint of one serving on the board of the USGBC, this came up in a discussion recently on one of our calls. We realize LEED will have to evolve, okay? We realize it. Just as the planning document we say in the lower ninth ward, this is an evolving, fluidy thing. It should not just be etched in stone, that's it. It's got to live and breathe.
Okay. I guess this question is informed by personal experience as much as anything else. You talked about how that you want to encourage, this is for Carrie, you want to encourage landlords to build green, putting green principles in their buildings. How do we encourage landlords who may or may not see the economic benefits of those achievements to do them? For example, in my apartment, I pay the electrical bill. My landlord is not going to replace my windows, but he pays the water bill, and he put in low-flush toilets.
I think that the only way that that happens is really through supply and demand, and by making sure that, well, first of all, you need to have a more rental housing stock than we have currently in New Orleans. Right now, there's so few decent apartments that people are sort of willing to settle for anything, right? So you have to increase that stock, and I think then landlords will follow suit because they'll realize that they can charge more either for a well-designed, green, healthy, energy-efficient house, or that people are demanding it, that they just can't rent it. So in order to just get people in the door, it has to be of a certain quality. I think that's the way to go. I mean, I also believe that, you could push it from a policy perspective, but that seems to be slow moving here in New Orleans.
I'd say also, remember that sustainability is more than energy efficiency. To me, there may be three components that are perhaps equally important, and energy efficiency is one of them. The other two, though, would be of interest to a landlord potentially. One is durability. The longevity of things over time, so that if somebody does a renovation and they treat it with durable materials, it's much more likely to last over a longer period of time and give return over a longer period of time. And the third one is promoting health and well-being. And that also comes back to affect the way in which the physical environment is treated. So if landlords do things that are supportive of well-being of the tenants, it means that at some level there are fewer problems. Now this may seem a little bit esoteric, but it's been shown, for example, that daylighting in buildings has affected absenteeism. And this was a factor that nobody expected. At first, people always thought that daylighting was simply going to lower energy costs. And then studies found that it actually significantly, statistically, affected people's desire to show up for work. And so this is something that's a little bit more hard to make an argument for at first cost, but it's tangible. It's just as real. And I think it's really important that we promote the well-being and the durability as well as the efficiency that's associated with sustainable design.
The number of houses that your nonprofit is going to be building around the city, are you looking at alternative building techniques and daylighting and energy efficiency specifically for these thousands of houses?
Is that for me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. So the question was, for the new buildings that are going up around the city that my nonprofit is working on, are we looking at building systems? Is that what you said? And what type of buildings are we creating? We've got a whole host of types of buildings that we're developing right now. That ranges from single-family residences to multifamily to senior housing. We also have a variety of types of buildings in terms of new renovations, got rehabs, and then new construction. So it's sort of all over the place. And one of the biggest changes I think that Providence Community Housing has recently adopted is this real commitment to build a green certified structure, no matter what it is, for every unit of housing. So they're looking to get green community certification, which is performance-based, so that's great. So it means that we are incorporating a variety of different techniques, but ultimately they'll have a certain energy efficiency, durability, site response, that kind of thing. Just to give you a couple of examples, we have lots of housing that's going up that is steel panel construction, sort of modular, built in a factory, very little waste on the job site, made out of recycled material, steel. We're doing lots of extra insulation, so sort of high thermal envelope. We have high performance HVAC, so we're investing a little extra in making sure that we get 13 SEER or even 14 SEER units, that type of thing. And then we're building all of the new construction that we're working on is located within the existing urban framework. So that's close to public transportation. We're investing in walkable communities. We're retaining street trees and planting more. We're doing all of these sort of things that sort of work with the site. And in New Orleans, a lot of our sites are actually brownfields. So we're engaging in remediation where necessary. So those are just some of the things that we're working on, but I have to tell you that every project is different.
There's an interesting statistic from the State of the World series that every construction project generates 3 to 7 tons of waste. And it turns out that even the process of construction is kind of profligate. And if you just think about the ways in which the material use could be more specific so that waste doesn't even occur to that extent during the process of construction, that this would make an enormous change in material use. That if you think about the embodied energy in materials, it turns out that that energy is more important over a certain period of time of up to 10 years compared to the amount of energy a building uses. And so for this reason, it makes more sense to be very careful in the selection of the materials and the construction process, and also the recycling of materials. Carrie made this wonderful little piece of furniture out in the lobby from recycled New Orleans flooring. And it turns out that once that embodied energy is used in the cutting of the tree, for example, and milling the wood, that to be able to reuse that piece of material for other projects is so much more efficient than starting from scratch. So whether it's a renovation or whether it's deconstructing buildings, which we're starting to do a little bit of in New Orleans, rather than simply throwing them in the landfill. Maybe some of you have been by Louisiana and St. Charles in the last couple of days, and they tore down a pretty bad fast food restaurant, that pink building on the corner. But what did they do? They just bulldozed it and took a giant claw and sort of crunched it up, and then they're putting it all in a giant truck, and it's going off to a landfill. And it's everything from CMU, concrete block, all kinds of wood, all kinds of steel, all kinds of concrete. All that stuff is just being mixed together and thrown away. Well, sometime we've got to get a little bit beyond that mentality and start thinking about recycling buildings as well as being careful in the way that we orchestrate new buildings.
I'd like to put a plug in for that display. If you have a minute, when you walk out the doors here, you'll see it. That was put together by a couple of students at the Tulane School of Architecture as well as with me. And really it was more of a look at the lack of a comprehensive citywide building recycling program. We really feel strongly that there needs to be one that's put into place. There have been so many houses, thousands and thousands of houses that have been gutted or fully demolished by the city, by FEMA, and very little architectural salvage is going on. And it's such a sad thing, too, here in New Orleans, where there are some amazing building pieces of buildings are just old. You've got thick, true wood. You've got architectural details. You've got molding, things that you would just die for in other cities, and we're just tossing it into the landfill, and it doesn't make sense. So there are a number of great organizations here in the city that do building recycling or deconstruction. The Green Project, Mercy Corps, Preservation Resource Center. Rebuilding Together, Operation Comeback. There are just a host of different ones. But the city really hasn't required anyone to participate in those programs. So it's all voluntary, and they really aren't dealing with the massive amounts of trash that are being created. So what the students did for that particular display is did some research about it, and then they looked at one pile of trash, just looked at one typical trash heap that you see them all the time here in New Orleans, and created a piece of furniture just out of what was found in that trash. So check it out. It's pretty interesting.
Hello? I think most of us in this room are probably more or less aware of the notion of first cost versus second cost. I believe John was talking about basically sensitizing landlords, sensitizing property owners as to the sort of economic incentives that should encourage them to invest maybe in more sustainable devices and materials outfitting their homes. Any thoughts as to what form this conduit might take? I mean, it seems like that there isn't really a sort of coalition or a venue for this kind of thing, and a lot of the irresponsible landlords would just as soon turn their backs to, you know, the mention of altruism or, you know, that kind of thing, because the big dollar sign goes up in front of their eyes, and, you know, they're not interested.
I think part of it has to come beyond the scale of education, but education is our mission. So in everything we do, I think there's an educational component. I do think that since Katrina, particularly with respect to energy, but perhaps in some other issues related to the landlord condition, people are more willing to consider financial incentives that involve sustainable conditions. And New Orleans has actually gone a long way. The previous panel talked about that in terms of supporting renewable energy use, for example, so that there can be some direct financial incentives. I've also thought that this university could probably be more active. What would happen, for example, if Tulane kind of took under its wing the neighborhood between Broadway and Carrollton, St. Charles, and Claiborne, and sort of said, we're going to be buying some buildings in there, maybe it's student housing or faculty housing, and we're going to do exemplary, careful, renewable, and sustainable design in rehabbing these buildings. And we're also going to provide some support for landlords who want to learn how to do it. I mean, to me, this is something where the university could kind of show the way a little bit. Clearly, that area could benefit from this sort of involvement. So I think there's some ways of doing it that are maybe a little bit still indirect, but perhaps positive.
And I was just going to offer that at the neighborhood level, I and all of us essentially use the neighborhood meetings to just continue to bullhorn this message, at least reaching the tenants, but we think they're getting back to the few little landlords we even have in the lower Ninth Ward, okay? And I can pretty much count them all on one or maybe a hand and a half here.